Good evening to you, listeners of Voice of Africa Radio. It's 11 minutes after 7 o'clock on Voice of Africa Radio. Today, the 12th of January 2015. You still tune into Voice of Africa Radio. A happy new year to you all. Back again on your favorite socio-political talk show, The Insight. With me in the studio this evening, Elizabeth The Rock Jones, a parliamentary candidate for Dartford constituency for UKIP, Mahmoud, Fiaz, Leighton and Wanstead, Liberal Democrat, and also a human rights activist, also with me in the studio this evening. And we will be joined via the telephone by Lembit Opik to also talk about this important issue that really matters most, talking about Tesco shrinking, and in the constituency of Elizabeth Jones, the huge investment project which was to be embarked upon by Tesco has been halted. Tesco, we will be discussing this and its consequence on the constituency and the entire economy of Great Britain and the distribution sector. Now we've seen a lot of downtrodden supermarket emerging, those from the German, Lidl, Aldi, and they are doing very well in England. We will also be discussing what went on in Paris, the new trend of terrorism or what. We'll be discussing this, as well as our own NHS, which is political footballing, the ANE, the waiting time in the ANE. Good evening once again, and thank you for joining me in this studio, and hope political time. Soon there will be elections in the United Kingdom. Elizabeth, are you canvassing?
Sorry?
Are you canvassing in your constituency to get a support?
Since the beginning of this year, and Happy New Year to you, Adam.
Happy New Year to you.
Out there. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Tesco, yes, and the abandoning of Dartford Town Centre project. They are the supermarket or the project that was going to be embarked upon by Tesco in Dartford. What is your take on that?
Well, it's a huge letdown for Dartford and Dartford Town Centre. I was canvassing there about three weekends ago, and I met the shopkeepers in Lowfield Street where the development was due to take place. It's a very large investment in Lowfield Street. It's number 26 to 142 of that street, and it was due to be an 8,000 square metre shop with 34 one-bedroom flats and 73 two-bedroom flats, but as of the 8th of January that is not going ahead. Now Tesco has already demolished about 70% of the property there, and the shopkeepers who remain are on monthly tenancies, which of course gives them some considerable anxiety. It looks awful. It looks like a meth addict's mouth with all the cracked up, vanished buildings and smashed up building sites. It's quite disgraceful. So really I see it as a failure of Dartford Borough Council to get to grips with this. This project has been mooted since 2002. It's been through various developments and stages, and only now, in 2015, has it now been formally rejected, and Tesco's confirmed it won't proceed. I think that Dartford Borough Council should have taken the lead in this matter, grabbed it by the neck and given Tesco's an ultimatum as to whether they were proceeding, in which case now we've got a huge gap of land to fill, and how are we going to fill it?
Well, aside the project, somewhere late last year, Tesco coming up with its financial statement and fiddling or trying to make it look good, and as things unfolded, the shares of Tesco dropped. And how would that affect a company such as Tesco? And now that production in the form of their sales and everything, they are saying they need to spend over 3.6 billion to improve upon certain things and increase the number of staff before they can catch up with time. How would it be? How would it affect them?
I don't think that's going to be their tack at all. I mean, on the 8th of January, they gave a clear indication that they were going to get rid of, they were going to close 43 stores, they were going to close their HQ in Chestnut, They're going to cancel the final dividend for the financial year of 2015. I think that they're shrinking considerably. I don't think that they're going to be expanding. They've got problems now because the structure of shopping has changed so much. So many people are buying online now. So many people are not going out to the out-of-town big hypermarkets now. People are shopping more locally. I, for instance, just shop locally. Nip out my house, go out to the nearest supermarket around the corner. I don't bother to get in my car and drive off to... I mean, we have got quite a few these big hypermarkets where I live, but I just go locally. So I think it's changing. They're just going to have to move with the changing landscape of consumerism.
Mahmoud, let's look at Tesco, shrinking of Tesco, the biggest supermarket in England. And
well, it's very sad. Loss of jobs, of investment, and obviously the loss of the accommodation as is very important. But there is, I will agree with Elizabeth that the shopping patterns are changing. The consumer is much more articulate now. He's no longer a sheep and can be shepherded by large stores like Tesco, Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer, simply going to buy goods because of the brand name. Tesco is not one of the best sort of names in industry. It was glossing over its figures of profitability. It was victimizing its suppliers. It was holding the politicians, all of those, to ransom, local authorities. It's so there is a positive side though, because what happened is when, I mean, for example, where I am in Leighton Wanstead, Leighton High Street, there's a lot of Tesco's there, and what that Tesco has done is suck the life out of the small shops, the individuality, the quality of shops that we need and the consumer wants, instead of the cheap things made in third world countries co-opted by bonded labour. So I think there is a positive side to it. We can, the small shopkeeper, he probably will be saved in Dartford, and what the Dartford Local Authority has to do is how we can revitalise the small shopkeeper, hold them individually, and bring a diversity and quality to the area. Not just brand names and sort of cheap goods made in third world sort of countries, by very pittance of pay. Obviously, I'm not going to name countries, but we all know who they are and where these sort of goods get from. And sometimes these large stores only need to give a penny extra for their goods for that employer to pay a decent wages, but they don't. They're blood-sucking the life out of our high street. They're blood-sucking the life out of their suppliers. All the interest in profit. Well, it looks like it's come to bite them back.
Elizabeth, as Mahmoud is saying that it's good for Dartford, do you agree with Mahmoud that if Tesco couldn't embark upon that development, how good is that to Dartford as a constituency?
Well, it's terrible for Dartford because that area of Dartford's been on hold now since 2002. So from 2002 to about date, the council, not me, the Dartford Borough Council has been heavily reliant on one single developer, namely Tesco. They've had a lack of vision. As I said earlier, they should have intervened earlier and given very strict time limits for this project to go ahead. As it is now, as I say, Lowfield Street looks like a bomb site. 70% of the buildings have been demolished. You've got little shops continuing in between the demolished sites. It's a very sad state of affairs. And the other concern is, of course, that these supermarkets, they're only building on about, I believe, 6% of the land they own. So we've got a big problem all around the country where supermarkets are sitting on large chunks of land which are undeveloped and which could be used better for the community. For instance, with Dartford, perhaps this could be used. We would like a mixed-use employment, residential mixed-use business to come in or developer to come in to use it. We don't really want flats. We want, job creation.
So, soon as you don't want flat, what kind of development do you want there?
We do want. What I'm saying, we don't just want flats. We want a mixed bag of employment base and residential base. Ideally, I would like something like a mini Silicon roundabout, whereby perhaps we could have tech startups be encouraged to come to Dartford because they're very good transport links. But something has to be done to revitalise the area. It can't just be flats all the time. I mean, it will be flats, obviously, but we need
the building stock in London has run out. Yes. We need more building in London. So if Tesco couldn't do it, why shouldn't you, as somebody vying to become the leader or the MP of the constituency, advocate for that parcel of land to be used for flats so that people can have accommodation in Dartford? Aside that, they can move elsewhere to seek for employment. Wouldn't that be great?
It would be great, but also we've got to think about the constituency of Dartford and for people having jobs actually in the constituency where they live. I think people should have that ability. I mean, I'm sure you work here. I presume you live quite locally here. And it's only right and fair that Dartford Town Centre should return to the glory it once was. It's gone downhill quite considerably, and this causes considerable unhappiness to the constituents.
You still tune into Voice of Africa Radio, and it's 21 minutes after 7 o'clock. I am in the studio with Elizabeth De Rock Jones, parliamentary candidate for Liberal UKIP in Dartford, and also the deputy chairwoman for Sadok constituency. She is doing very well to get Dartford, and the statistics showing that Elizabeth may come to third position, but we're hoping that things will change. And they've been able to relegate Liberal Democrats. Mahmoud, it's not looking good for your party when it comes to...
I mean, that's what the media... I mean, this obviously we're going slightly off track what I was talking about, but that's what the media would have you say, I believe. But believe it or not, the last poll, that's poll of polls, two of the polls, actually, one of them, the last one you got, actually was neck to neck with UKIP. So when I said to you earlier, that come close to election, people will then not look at celebrities and calamity, we will actually look at serious people who have backbone and experience to run the country, education, health service, all of these things. That's when it gets serious. That's when they come to put the cross on, and that's when things will start changing.
Well,
and it already has.
Yes, that's what things will start to change. Now, we've been asked not to dwell much on immigration. So, as we all know, one way or the other, one of us may fall victim to sickness or any form of disease, and you may be rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night or at any time. The A&E waiting time, Elizabeth.
Yes.
The last year or getting to the tail end of the year, and now the waiting time. Have we met? Did we meet the target of the waiting time, the A&E waiting time, or there's a little bit?
Well, the government has put in place a target that 95% of people attending A&E must be treated within 4 hours. I don't know where they got that figure from. Why 4 hours? Why 95%? The previous Labour government had an even higher hurdle of 98%. Now, we are dealing with people, and when you're dealing with people, it's a complex situation. You can't sort of just funnel people in and out of situations. So I don't know where these spurious targets come from. I really don't understand it. Wales is the worst miscreant on 83.3%. But honestly, I think a lot of these targets are absolutely spurious.
Mahmoud, A&E and NHS, what's wrong? Liberal, Democrat and Conservative.
The NHS has been used as a political football to kick about. What we really should be doing is working together so you can improve it. Now, the problem didn't just start now. It started when, first of all, your surgery is no longer an NHS. It's actually privatised. It was privatised under the last Labour government. So surgery, your doctor used to be able to ring the doctor, make an appointment.
I believe the current government is further privatising the NHS. Am I right?
Let me just complete the picture for you. And then what happens is that if you was out of house, you could actually ring the doctor who would come to see you. Well, when they wrote the new contracts, which meant that the surgery actually became nothing more than private, the doctors no longer come out and were able to opt out of that. So now, instead of ringing your doctor who personally knows you, personally has your record, and say, you're rushing to A&E. Then on the A&E, you're right about statistics and figures. And then the other thing they did was that as I spoke before this show, one of my clients, she's a nurse. She says she has 10 managers above her. And that quite often she will actually just be going from meeting to meeting instead of looking after patients and answerable to patients. She's been answerable to managers. And what she's actually done, got fed up and opened a cake shop instead. This is a ridiculous situation to have. What we need to do is the old days where the doctors were in charge, nurses were in charge, and they're all answerable to the patients.
But the target that we set that if somebody goes to the A&E, the minimum or the maximum amount of time spent there should be 4 hours, and the number of the percentage that came out that it was superb. I was in the A&E, children in A&E on the 26th of December from 11 p.m. till 5 a.m.
Yeah.
How many hours difference?
Well, that's a fail. That's a fail.
Yes. So if you tell me we've got 98% or something, that's where did we get that statistics from?
There's a very good program in Italia where one of the nurses actually admitted that some of the managers actually force her to fill statistics to make it look good. That's not what the NHS for. NHS for to serve people and patients. And the other thing we heard a lot about was ambulances queuing up to the A&E because they can't get in. It's not they can't get in. That once the patient's in the ambulance, after 2 to 3 hours, they're not registered. So a patient can be held in an ambulance for 3 hours, go to the NHS, get served in 5 minutes, and on paper he was served in 5 minutes.
Elizabeth,
yes, Adam.
3 hours.
What do you think is this, or how? What are the solutions that the UKIP would propose in terms of cutting down the time within the A&E and to get more people treated within time?
Well, what we propose for a start would be to free up the GP's time. They're doing too much paperwork and going to, we say, unnecessary meetings. We would also restructure the NHS. We would want the wards to be managed by the matrons, senior nurses. There was a recent article actually by I think it was The Guardian, stating that research had been prepared that doctors in fact make the best managers of hospitals. So we would want, if there is going to be a CEO or a management structure of an NHS hospital, we want to see a doctor at the top of that, someone who's medically qualified. Another problem, of course, is the nature of A&E and the type of things that people go to A&E for. The public has to understand that A&E does not stand for anything and everything. If you're going to A&E, it has to be for a genuinely serious problem. If not, wait for your GP or phone up NHS 111, see if they can assist you. The Republic of Ireland has been all too aware of the problem with random people turning up with perhaps minor illnesses and minor ailments. And what happens in the Republic of Ireland, if you turn up at A&E without a GP's referral in advance, you have to pay €100. And that is a measure, I think, to keep away a lot of the, let's say, the Saturday night drunks or people with sort of spurious problems. So that's what the Republic of Ireland is doing.
But some of the people that goes to the A&E are genuinely sick.
Of course they are.
So if they come there and you said, yes, you need to have a GP referral. Meanwhile, the GPs do not work in the night. So around about 11 o'clock and you fall sick, you don't need to have a GP's referral before you've been treated at A&E.
I don't know how the Republic of Ireland manages that. That's the Republic of Ireland's policy to charge €100 for entry to A&E unless you've had a GP referral. That's not, of course, the policy of the United Kingdom, nor would it be. I mean, there has to be a lot of structural reform of the NHS. It would be helpful if we could perhaps have a forensic accountant to go through the NHS management figures. For instance, there's a lot of overspend. We are spending 120 million per annum on locums. We're not rationalising work contracts. I think that employment contracts have to be revised to ensure that there's organisation to cover evening shifts, night shifts and weekend shifts. We also have to amend the tariffs for acute trusts, because many acute trusts are unduly penalised because they do take in non-elective admissions, as you're stating earlier, people who are in very serious situation and who have not perhaps gone through the system just turning up, and why should they be unduly penalised? Perhaps it's just a postcode issue that they're suffering with. And also another thing that UKIP would be considering is perhaps we really do need a separate psychiatric A&E.
What do you mean?
Well, at the moment we have A&E covers everything. You've got, for instance, if you've got a severe pain in your abdomen, you've got a severe headache, or I don't know what your issues are, you go to A&E for a physical ailment, you'd be out there waiting. Whereas a lot of A&E problems can be psychiatric.
Well,
no, it's true. There needs to be more input with emergency psychiatric admission to perhaps separate them, so people with the physical problems.
Mahmoud, the leader of your party is advocating for mental health time limit as well. Just that patients with a mental health. People with a mental problem could be seen as those with a physical health. Is Elizabeth now endorsing the Liberal Democrats' policy on health? As she's saying we should get A&E on psychiatry.
Not just endorsed by Elizabeth, but endorsed by the Labour Party. The mention tax of the Labour Party. That's endorsed by the Labour Party. The NHS you spoke about. Who done the feasibility? Who came up with the idea? It was the Liberal Democrats. But the change in government is better than actually implemented. Well, like the Boris Bites, where Ken Livingstone put the idea, but it was Boris that came and implemented it. So, I'm glad they are. It's very good. I mean, we need joint up thinking, but we're going to be very careful is that we don't blame the patients. It's not the patients that are at fault. It's the administration and the political system that's at fault. And that's what needs to be covered. But in regards to mental health, our leader is absolutely right. Quite often, let's say you see someone with, I don't know, a cut. It might be so far. It might be mental. So it's a bad time we took mental health very, very seriously. Don't hold me to this. I'm just going to talk about, I believe 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 figures, people suffer from mental health. And there's 3 people sitting in this room. So it's a very serious issue, and I'm glad the Lib Dem took it up. I'm glad Nick Clegg is the leader to take this seriously.
32 minutes after 7 o'clock on Voice of Africa Radio. You still tune in to Voice of Africa Radio. I have with me Elizabeth Jones, UKIP parliamentary candidate for Dartford, Mahmoud, Fiaz, Liberal Democrat, Leighton and Wanstead. I have been joined by former Member of Parliament on the ticket of Liberal Democrat, Lembit. Opik is on the line with me. Good evening and thank you for joining us this evening on Voice of Africa Radio. Happy New Year to you.
Lembit has entered the building. I'm sorry I'm not there myself in person. I just had to go and have a top-level meeting out of town, but it's always a delight to speak with yourself and your wonderful panel.
Thank you very much for giving us this valuable time of yours. Last week, we saw a very horrific incident in France in regards to the killing of some journalists and hostage taking in France. Are we seeing a different form of terrorism in Europe, or what are we witnessing now?
I don't think it is different. I just think that it is more dramatic. I was Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland for 10 years, and I grew up in Northern Ireland as well, and it experienced terrible terrorism across 30 years. I guess we got used to it, but it's worth remembering that over 3,000 people were killed in Northern Ireland during what was called the Troubles. And that's an enormous number. If that proportion of people had been killed across the United Kingdom as a whole, that would have been over 120,000 people. So people in Northern Ireland are quite used to this very extreme kind of violence. What's different, though, I think, is that people are used to having had a period of great peace across most of the Western European Union, at least. And what we're now seeing is the introduction of violence, very dramatic violence, televised violence, which is causing a big difference to people's state of mind. Now, we might start talking about solutions later, but I think we would need to recognise that this kind of violence is quite familiar. The one difference might be the willingness of the terrorists to die. It's once again not unheard of, it's happened before, but that makes the terrorist position much more volatile, much more frightening, because the normal rules, if you like, the normal rules of engagement that occurred in Northern Ireland didn't apply. The terrorists didn't try to kill themselves, they simply tried to kill others. So that's, I think, the big difference, but I don't think we need to describe this as a complete revolution in how terrorism happens. It's happened like this all over the world. It might be a little bit new, something that we are not used to in big European capital cities.
But when the execution of these terrorists was in a military style, isn't it as a result of the military training they get outside Europe, places like Yemen and Jordan, that has allowed them to have this kind of skill to inflict pain and maim people in Europe? And if so, what are the governments of some European nations who are sponsoring these boys or having them outside to have this training to execute their actions of subverting constitutionally government elsewhere? What are they doing to that to stop these boys going and coming in with killing styles?
Three very simple but very important observations. The IRA, that's the Irish Republican Army, the Provisional IRA, who operated in Northern Ireland for a long time, were often regarded as the most professional terrorist outfit anywhere in the world. And so the United Kingdom, at least, is familiar with these very experienced terrorist techniques. And Father Meinhof in Germany, the Basque Septis in Spain, we've all had a high level of professionalism in this sector. So that's not new, even if we probably get more coverage now for the terrible incidents in Australia, but also in Paris. Second point is that it's worth remembering the West has in itself used terrorism, or let's use paramilitaries, against its enemies. And there is some evidence that Western powers have trained paramilitaries to attack their enemies in other countries. So we have actually been involved in doing something, not the same thing, but using people who are willing to fight on our behalf in other countries. In some ways you could say the Vietnam War was a classic example of that. The third and the last one, and this is the really interesting point, what do we do about these trained experts in paramilitary violence coming back to the West? Very, very difficult. If we don't let them back, we're leaving the problem somewhere else. If we do let them back, then we have all kinds of problems of surveillance, limitations to people's civil liberties and everything else. That is not a question which has been effectively answered. I do have an answer for it myself. My view is you will never beat terrorism by simply suppressing the population. You beat terrorism by addressing the underlying issues, however difficult that is. That's what we learned in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, we didn't win by getting rid of all the terrorists. We won by taking their motivation to terrorise away. And it may seem far off to say that about the current insurgency and the current problems such as in Paris and elsewhere, but that's how it felt in Northern Ireland, say, 25 years ago, and we did it. So my advice, and I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it, we need to find a way of engagement. Nothing else is going to solve the problem in the long term.
Well, we're looking at or hearing discussion on the media platform. It looks as if we are intolerant when it comes to other views of how to contain or how to prevent these kind of actions. We tend to turn an eye on religion, talking about Islam. Sajid has stated that it will be lazy not to involve Islam or Muslims in this, and Cameron has supported that, yes, because of the Muslim society, all those who are causing this, all those who are doing this are within the Muslim society, and for that matter, Islam cannot be overlooked when it comes to terrorism. Would this kind of attitude and utterances help?
I'm very interested to know what the others in the panel think, but I'll share with you my view first. God doesn't kill people.
Yes.
It's humans who kill people. And Islam is actually a very peaceful faith. If you read the Quran and if you read the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad was very clear that Muslims ought to respect Christianity as a relative of Islam. And indeed, Islam grew out of Christianity, just as Christianity grew out of Judaism. Those three religions are very close relatives, very closely connected. And on the whole, there are very few people at any senior level in any of those religions who say that the violence is good. Second point, let's remember that people have used Christianity as an excuse, everything from the Crusades further on for violence. And I have a strong faith myself. I don't think my faith justifies violence. I don't think that God tells me or anybody else to be violent. And I think the same is true of Islam. I think the issue fundamentally here is a cultural one. People feeling a sense of oppression, people feeling that they have a very strong need to try and promote something that they may feel cannot be promoted in other ways. That's wrong thinking. But I've seen it before. When I worked in Northern Ireland, I could see people using terrorism to do something that they thought they couldn't do peacefully. And the last thing I'll say is, and I'm really interested to know what the others think, is my judgment, if you don't do this, if we don't do the engagement thing, then we'll never get past this, and we'll simply write this off as a religious problem. It's a human problem.
Well, let me go to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, what happened in France this week, last week?
Yes.
It's an abhorrent situation, and something ought to be done. I believe UKIP is against foreign invasions, and as a matter of fact, nobody can run away out of this fact. As a result of we invading Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, Libya, and most recently Syria has caused all these problems. Am I right or wrong?
I don't think that the wave of fundamentalist Islamic terrorism is caused solely by the interventions. I think the interventions are a hook to hang a hat on, and I think it was totally wrong, absolutely incredibly stupid thing for us to have invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. It's achieved nothing. The aerial bombing of Libya under this government from March 2011 to October 2011, what has that achieved? It seems to have bombed Libya back to the Stone Age. So I think we should really have disengaged. UKIP is very much a party of non-interventionism. We believe that people must find their way organically, do things their style, their way, because whatever we do, whoever goes in won't listen to all sides of the story in that country and will impose an outside view as to how a country should be governed, which won't work. It simply won't work long term. I mean, Islamic terrorism, fundamentalist Islamic terrorism, has been around a long time. In 2004, Theo van Gogh was shot dead by a Moroccan terrorist because of making his film Submission. We had 2005, the Danish cartoons. 1988, of course, we had Salman Rushdie. So this is not a new problem by any means.
2005, the Danish cartoon.
Yes.
The magazine, the producers of that cartoon were also cautioned by the former French president, Jacques Chirac, that in as much as we have freedom of speech comes with responsibility and national security as well. So wouldn't that be right, that your freedom of speech doesn't end at the nose of somebody's nose of somebody, where his freedom of speech begins?
Freedom of speech goes to the very heart of Western success, because with freedom of speech you have freedom of thought. I'm talking to you now over radio airwaves, which were developed, I don't know if necessarily created, I believe it was it Marconi? Was it Baird? Please forgive me if I can't remember who it was exactly. Baird did television. It was Logie Baird TV. We had with the radio waves, the TV, the internet, all these powerful means of communication were all created because of our discourse, our ability to have conflicting opinions. And because we have conflicting opinions with scientific research, it leaks into all areas of life. This is why the Western civilization is at its peak. We're at a scientific and technological peak, and we're improving all the time because we have that freedom of discourse. Freedom of speech, if it's qualified, it's not freedom of speech. I understand the arguments. People say, well, of course, you've got libel laws, you've got hate speech, you've got the Public Order Act in this country. You have to be careful, particularly on the continent, with privacy laws, which are much stricter than this country. But this is actually this attack, this Charlie Hebdo attack, is an attack on the soul of Western success. I think this is why there's been such an extreme response to it.
Well, Mahmoud, a Muslim, as you are today, hearing this, that these boys,
not just when I was born a Muslim.
These boys are all from the Muslim background, and they did this in the name of Islam. What is your take on that?
Well, let me first of all say I'm a little bit baffled. Obviously, I don't know whether you're listening now. You may know that I actually hold a degree in engineering and microelectronics engineering. So I'm a little bit about inventions. Freedom of speech has got nothing to do with inventing things. I don't know where Elizabeth's got that from. I don't know how that connects in really. But let me just read you these words. Yeah. My brother was killed by two terrorists, by two false Muslims. You know what that was? That was a brother of the policeman that was killed. Islam is a religion of peace and love. As far as my brother's death is concerned, it was a waste. He was very proud of his name. What the media has not told you, the policeman protecting those people that was killed in line was a Muslim. His brother.
Yeah, but terrorist doesn't know that you are a Muslim or Christian. He wants to send his false message across.
What I'm saying to you is that Also, there was another horrendous crime, equally like this, in Pakistan, when school children were killed by so-called fundamentalist Muslim terrorists. So what makes one person hate another, go indiscriminately? I mean, what crime did those children commit except go to school? What crime did these people commit at the Paris magazine office except go to work? So what makes one person hate so much person that's willing to go and kill them, give his life and die as well? What equally, a week later on, a kosher supermarket was attacked. People were killed. Equally there, one of the staff was a Muslim. Because like the Limpopo, the Muslim, Jews and Christians, we have the same school of thought. He shielded the Jewish customers and hid them in a walk-in fridge to save their life. So what makes one person save a person's life, another one hate it? I'll tell you what it is. The people who killed men indiscriminately were of weak mind and fell into the trap of hatred. Hatred propagated by people like EDL, the BNP, the people who blame other people for their problems.
Thank God you didn't call UKIP.
The people who save, well, I mean, they're not far off the mark, are they? Let's just give you a comment actually that Rupert Murdoch said. Now he's not UKIP, but you can see the type of brain he is. He said his was this: even peaceful Muslims should be held responsible for this.
Not him alone.
Let me just stop you, Adam. Yeah, I am bald. Yeah, you're bald. So if you go and commit a crime, does that mean all bald people are now guilty? Or all ginger-haired people are guilty? Or short people are guilty? No, this is ridiculous. And what we got to understand is that when the Jews were attacked by the fascists of Hitler, the first thing the Nazis started doing was ridiculing Jews with cartoons. Let's not go back.
You still tuned into Voice of Africa Radio. In the studio is Elizabeth Jones, UKIP Dartford constituency contesting parliamentary member. I have Mahmoud, Fiaz and Lembit, Opik also at the other side of the studio joining us in this conversation. Lembit, you had your co-panelists in the studio and what they are saying about the Charlie Hebdo attack in France. Now, what do you think the European governments can do to help the security of its citizens? What are we doing now to make sure that lives and property in Europe is secured or saved from these lunatics?
I'm actually very interested in what Elizabeth Jones said is UKIP's policy, and that's one of non-intervention. Now, interestingly enough, for a very long time, that was the liberal tradition. It was to accept that in a relativistic world, you shouldn't be imposing your philosophy or your culture on other countries. I think we've moved away from that. I think some of the reason that we've got this trouble is, as Elizabeth and UKIP have implied, we've started messing around in places where we shouldn't be. Now, that doesn't solve the problem now, but it probably explains a little bit of how we can solve it. Answer to your question for me would be this: we have to start trying to understand the motivations. We cannot possibly secure every government building, every controversial studio, every outspoken channel, every magazine which can cause offence from attack. There are just too many of them. And that's really not a free society if we live with the ever-present threat of attack, because we haven't got a security guard for everybody who says something which might be unpopular. Therefore, the only way we can secure a safer West, a safer world, is by actually trying to discuss things with people we may not like. I remember so many times looking at people who hated each other in rooms trying to solve problems in Belfast, and actually over time they did. Let's remember that the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union could have destroyed the entire planet. But in the end, it was realized the only solution was if the Premier of the United States and the Premier of the Soviet Union actually began a dialogue. And that's what Richard Nixon did. He may have had many other faults, but Richard Nixon did that quite effectively in terms of Russia, and very effectively with China. He brought China in from the cold. So my answer is simple. Once again, I'm interested to know what my fellow panelists think. But aside from non-intervention, which I think Elizabeth Jones might be right about, we have to now start talking to people we may not like and say, what do you want? What can we do to begin to find common ground? And how can we stop killing being your first choice of action?
Looking at provision of non-lethal support to the Arabian Peninsula, countries in the Arabian Peninsula to train these youth to fight on behalf of the Western government in overthrowing some government in Arabia. Would that also be looked into? And don't you think that if we looked into that and start dialogue, that would also protect the shores of the Western society?
Yes, once again, my point of view, I can answer very briefly. If we were less involved in sometimes arming people who then become our enemies, we'd have fewer enemies. It's very interesting. I'll give you an example. With ISIL, it looks to me like some of the Western actions against Syria actually helped to arm ISIL, who are now a big problem to the West. Iran, for example, is very unhappy about the involvement of the West in early stages of ISIL's evolution. The Mujahideen were armed by the West and supported by the West against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. Once the Soviets were defeated, the West walked away. No, there was no after plan. There was no rebuilding plan. And so therefore, those people who had helped us remove the Russians, the Soviets, were then left to become enemies of the West. So this is the thing I've learned, and it's taken me 49 years to learn this, but I've learned that the only solution is if you understand motivations and you're consistent. The West looks hypocritical to me a lot of the time. Now, that's so much harder than the simple statements about doubling the police presence, doubling the number of soldiers on the streets of France, for example, snooping on people, interfering in our private lives to make sure that we're not terrorists. But really, the only long-term solution is to actually coexist. There is no other way of creating a safer world.
Elizabeth.
Yes, Adam.
Now, it's getting to our shores. We're now scared. Every time, every day, we'll be talking about the returnee from Syria and those who are to be arrested, those who are not fortunate that will get through the net and get into the society. We are scared of them because they've had a couple of strong training, and their mindset has been, they've been brainwashed to the extent that death is nothing to them. They can easily kill themselves and kill other people. What do you think the government should do to prevent these boys from going outside to get this kind of training, let alone coming in to destroy lives and property?
Well, for a start, the UKIP policy would be that once you've gone out to Syria or Iraq, that's it, you're not coming back. You forward. That solves a problem. That solves one problem. Again, I reiterate, we believe in non-interventionism. The government has spent a huge amount of money on community projects to try and access potential young men who could perhaps become fundamentalists, to stop them becoming fundamentalists. In 2009, the government spent about 12 million on an outreach programme called Prevent. Unfortunately, quite a lot of that money was actually used for organisations who are very fundamentalist. So quite a mess. I think if you are going to spend money on these projects, it has to be very carefully monitored to ensure that the organisations receiving the monies are on message and are not selling a fundamentalist line. But I don't know how you're going to monitor that. Perhaps cut off all funding whatsoever. Try and avoid multiculturalism. Say no, we all live as one. You cannot have an atomised existence and live in ghettos. You have to partake of a broader society. I think perhaps we need to have a commission concerning faith schools as well. Is it appropriate whether we should continue to have faith schools? And also, again, non-interventionism is very, very important. In Egypt, we've seen, I don't know if you were aware, on the 1st of January, the president of Egypt, El-Sisi, gave a very, very important speech. It wasn't covered by the BBC, but fascinating. I might just read you out a bit. This is El-Sisi, the president of Egypt. He said that The current, he takes the view that the current extremist Islam is antagonising the entire world. It is antagonising the entire world. Does this mean that 1.6 billion people, Muslims, should want to kill the rest of the world's inhabitants, that is 7 billion, so that they themselves may live? Impossible. Now, what he's asking for is that there be an insight into what is going on with the religion. Why is it taking a fundamentalist turn?
Isn't Al-Sisi himself guilty of what he is saying?
Well,
why
really.
wouldn't Al-Sisi dialogue with the Muslim Brotherhood? Why wouldn't they have a roundtable discussion with Muslim Brotherhood rather than banning them? And
who were elected, by the way?
Well, they were elected on a certain platform. When they got into power, they started developing Islamo-fascist style policies, which were oppressing women. And on the 30th of June 2013 now?
Don't you think that is what...
20 million people signed a petition to get rid of them. There were mass marches in Tahrir Square to get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the military then stepped in, removed the Muslim Brotherhood. Sisi was an interim army general in charge of the country. He's now sort of reneged from his army position and is now the president. It's a very difficult situation. They are in Egypt. They're suffering very serious privation. There are people in Egypt who are much poorer than Gazans, and the level of violence in Egypt with political violence is very high.
Well, Mahmoud,
he's doing what he can.
Mahmoud, we'd let Mahmoud join in before we take Lembit. Mahmoud, be snappy. We don't have much time. The solution, or if you may propose something, that...
The solution is that we should look closer to home as well, stop the people's peddlers of hatred, we're going to start with ourselves first, really. You mentioned about UKIP earlier on, they would mention them. I'm awfully sorry, perhaps I should have.
Why? UKIP is the only party in the United Kingdom that is non-interventionist. They don't want to go to Libya to create another Somalia in Libya.
Oh no, let me finish because it's going to go. Rosanne Duncan, one of the councillors, has been kicked out of her party because he said Negroes. There's something about their face that I don't like.
Well, let's look at the ignorance of the Western media. Isn't it also another factor that is fueling this kind of attack? I could give you a whole list
of Lib Dems who are behaving badly.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry,
yes, Lembit.
Someone interrupted us.
Yeah.
Could you ask me the question again?
Yeah, the question is some of the ignorance of the Western media. Is it not also another factor fueling this kind of terrorism or extremism in the West?
Yes, it is. Winners write the history. And the more I have done international broadcasting, the more I have realised the extent to which the Western media presents Western actions through a filter. Sometimes I think that it's surprising that people in Afghanistan don't accuse Christians of having invaded Afghanistan because Tony Blair was a Catholic, for example, and George Bush claimed to be Christian as well. So in that sense, you can always filter something to make it look in a certain way. And there is an ignorance because we don't see the whole story. This is why I get back to this difficult but simple answer to your question. The only way we solve these problems is by listening without prejudice to people whose points of view we may not agree with. That's got to be the starting point. We will never get peace through violence from the West or from the terrorists. We might get peace if we replace the shouting with the shooting, and ultimately, the shooting with the shouting, and ultimately the shouting, the talking, and this dialogue which solves the problem.
Well, thank you very much for your time.